Welcome back to episode number 8 of the Rutgers Rundown podcast. I'm your host, Nick Hart, alongside my co-host, Matthew Mangam. Break last week for spring break, Matt, but a lot to talk about here today. Rutgers women's basketball playing a little postseason in the WNIT. We had Rutgers wrestling at the National NCAA Tournament. Touch on both men's and women's lacrosse, and then we'll finish up with some baseball, softball, and of course, the spring game coming up. We have Rutgers football news. So, Matt, we'll jump right into it. Rutgers basketball, women's basketball, 17 days in between games. They obviously lost their Big Ten tournament game. They play Army. Kind of was a shock. Not only did Rutgers get a home game, but it was also a first-round bye and an at-large bid to the WNIT.
Yeah, Nick, if you told me, at any time during the season, Rutgers women's basketball would be playing postseason basketball, but not men's basketball, I would have called you crazy. Well, maybe not middle of the season because we saw men's basketball obviously doing bad. But the fact that women's basketball is playing in the WNIT, it's just shocking. But hey, credit to them. You know, they beat Army 71-60, and they had a really, really solid first half. You would say second half, Army kind of got back together. Almost they made it a close game, but the first half, women's basketball, credit to them. Really, really great stuff. You had multiple players in double-digit points. You know, with JoJo Lacey, Shakara Perkins, Awa Sidibe, and Destiny Adams. And I have to say, someone I think had a really solid game. Awa Sidibe, 6 for 6 on the floor, a steal as well, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. 4 rebounds. So maybe didn't do much on the glass and everything, but still really, really solid. And hey, they live to see another day. So credit to them.
Well, that is true. They move on to the Super 16, not the Sweet 16, of the WNIT, where they will face either Charleston or Howard. We'll find that out later tonight, as that game will be played, I want to say around 7:30, 8 o'clock. But yeah, it was interesting because Rutgers obviously didn't have a great season. You look at the record. 12-19, 3-15 in conference play. You came off of a brutal performance against Nebraska in the first round of the Big Ten tournament. And then for a team that hadn't played in 17 days, 18 days, it wasn't bad. I mean, Rutgers got out to an early 18-4 lead. They went on a crazy run to start the first. That was in the first 4 minutes. Offense slowed down the next 6 minutes. They only ended up scoring 6 points to get to 24 for the first. But played well enough to win throughout the rest of the game. And Army's not a bad team by any stretch. I mean, you look at them, obviously, they're playing in the Patriot League. You look at the competition. They did end up playing in the Patriot League final and losing to Lehigh. So it wasn't an easy matchup for Rutgers, but it's also, I feel like, a game you kind of expect to win as a Power 4 school going up against a mid-major.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that I want to say women's basketball is expected to lose every single game against, everybody. But they did have a really good non-conference schedule for the most part. I mean, you also could say, oh, it's very easy facing teams like Iona and, NJIT and stuff like that, or Manhattan. But overall, I still had a pretty solid non-con schedule. But I don't know, I had doubts about this game. And hey, they proved me wrong. They're in the Super 16 now. And we'll see how far they can go because this roster right now is very limited. Of course, McMillan still day-to-day with an apparent injury. I don't really know about that. A lot of smoke in the air about whether she'll be in the Bigs next year. Antonia Bates obviously out for the season. And Lisa Thompson has been out. I think the last couple of games she's been out, right? She's hurt. I don't know exactly the time frame.
She played in the Big Ten tournament game. Rutgers kind of ran with a 7-player rotation in that game, which very similar to what they did in the first round, or their first game in the WNIT. Yeah. But I guess it was kind of maybe a re-aggravation of the knee injury that she had earlier in the season. But Rutgers is running with a slim bench.
It's extremely slim.
Well, you look at it. You realistically have, 7 scholarship players left on the bench? And
yeah,
it's going to get dicey for Rutgers if they start to get into foul trouble like they have all season. But luckily, Rutgers was able to stay out of that. I want to say everybody but Janae Walker got into the game.
Oh, yeah, Janae Walker. Because I'm looking at the box score, and all the starters played at least 25 minutes, and Maya Petticourt, not starting, played 30 minutes.
And then you had Kennedy Brand, who played 4 minutes, Deja Young, who got a little bit of time at the end of the half. Again, wouldn't be too shocked to continue to see those two get some minutes, especially if Rutgers makes a run, because it's you can kind of tell throughout the game that they didn't really have their game legs, if you will, and rightfully so. You hadn't played in so long, but nonetheless, it's a nice win. I mean, Rutgers, I guess you can say they're continuing on the dance. I don't know if this is considered the big dance, maybe the slightly smaller dance, but it's a good opportunity for Rutgers to continue to play. Great for the seniors, obviously, too. JoJo Lacey, Awa Sidibe, Adams, and Cornwell get to play another game. But it should be interesting as they continue to move on, and if they continue to move on. And like we said, we'll play the winner of Charleston versus Howard later on tonight. Still not sure if that'll be a home or an away game for Rutgers. We'll find that out later in the week. But Matt, you just came back from your big trip to Philadelphia for NCAA Nationals for Rutgers wrestling, and was less than ideal.
Yeah, I mean, after Big Ten's results was less than ideal, Rutgers still ultimately had 7 qualifiers. Jackson Turley and Yaroslav Slavakowski both earned at-large bids, but 2 guys that were still solid enough to be national qualifiers. Obviously, Yaroslav Slavakowski didn't earn a bid in the traditional way because he had to forfeit from Big Ten due to injury, but the community knew he was still solid enough to wrestle. And then Turley had a bad Big Ten, but also had a good enough career where they know he's a solid wrestler. Did go to an 0-2 though in Philly, so obviously had a really poor tournament, had the worst out of the entire Star Knight's lineup, so his career is done. But yeah, there was a lot of weird positive moments and a lot of bad negative moments. I'll start with the biggest positive moment, the moment that had me really hyped, I will admit, as a journalist, but I was like, wow, that's insane. Round 2, Dean Peterson versus Richie Figueroa, the reigning NCAA champ from Arizona State. It was a really, really even, close bout, and out of nowhere, in the middle of, I think it was I'm trying to remember, second period. It was a 5:42, so halfway to the bout, Peterson works the cradle, gets Figueroa in the position, and lands the pinfall, and that moment was really, really hyped. I mean, Peterson just pinned the reigning national champion, and at that moment, I said, okay, look, he has a clear path to the title match. There's, he has to. And then he ended up losing to Vince Robinson in the quarterfinals, who actually did win the title, so he lost to the champion, but a match that Peterson really could have done better. He lost 4-2. So then was looking to just at least earn All-American honors in the blood round. Lost to Steve Pullen in that match, 6-4, and that match was very controversial. I mean, Northern Colorado got the takedown, and then Peterson looked to land the takedown, and then Rutgers threw the brick, and they reviewed it, and then Peterson landed a takedown later on. That the coaching that didn't throw the brick for, that Peterson got mad about. So it was a really weird bout. Then I'll go to Dylan Chauver, again another guy who last year was a Big Ten champ, so he had really high expectations. He was an All-American. Lost his first match against Sean Spittle. That's an upset right there. You lose your first match. So then fell into wrestlebacks and won his next 3 matches to make it to the blood round. So Chauver on the backside was going crazy. Beat Kyrie, Braxton Brown, Anthony Noto, 2 of the guys he lost to this season. So was getting those matches that he needed back, and they all were in overtime. So close matches, but he was getting the wins, which is important. And then goes to face Connor McGonagall from VT in the blood round again, winning your All-American win, and you have a chance to wrestle all the way to 3rd place, which will be a solid finish. He lost 5-1, no offense whatsoever. Something that Goodale's been criticizing him of this season is just Chauver lacking offense, which is weird because we saw that in those previous matches, he was having great offense. He was getting takedowns, scoring points, but both of his losses at NCAAs just couldn't get anything going offensively. Then Joey Oliveri, another guy in the blood round, had some good wins, but lost a close match to Vance Vombar from Minnesota 5-3. But he probably had the best all the Scarlet Knights in the blood round. I mean, Rutgers went 0-3 overall in the blood round. So no All-Americans for the second time in 3 seasons. After last year, they had Chauver and Yaroslav Slavakowski. Now, speaking of Yara, wrestling was a torn pec, so obviously it was a very, very tough time for him. But Nick, you obviously were producing for WRC, so I'm sure you heard it, but he was banged up.
Even watching some of the highlights, you could see, I don't know if it was a brace or what it was, but all types of bandaging and bracing all over his pec, and a huge injury to be fighting through.
Yes.
And not to mention going up against probably the best heavyweight of all time, maybe in college wrestling, or most dominant
Yeah,
heavyweight in Gable Stevenson. For those of you that don't follow wrestling or didn't follow the NCAA tournament, quite possibly the biggest upset in the history of college wrestling. Oklahoma State's Wyatt Hendrickson takes down Gable Stevenson in the finals. And not just in the finals, Matty M, but it was typical March fashion. It was at the buzzer.
Yeah.
15 seconds left. Hendrickson gets the 3-point takedown, goes up, what was it, 5-3, I think, at the time, and produces probably the craziest upset, if not in all of sports, most definitely in college wrestling.
Yeah, I'd say so. That was insane. I mean, Gable, obviously an Olympic champion, and won the national title in Minnesota. The other 2 seasons he was there, and this year he was looking, really, really projected to do that. He was 18-0. He hasn't lost in 2019, so that was the year he didn't win because he lost to Penn State's guy heavyweight back then. But yeah, what a result from Wyatt Hendrickson. I mean, after seeing his reactions, his emotions, really, really awesome stuff. Definitely the biggest upset in college wrestling, I'd say. But yeah, mentioning Yara against Gable, of course, Yara had to face Gable on the front side of the bracket in round 2, but he lost on DQ because he took too many stalling calls. But Yara was doing that just to avoid Gable further hurting him, because Gable's obviously very dominant. But Gable pinned Yara when Rutgers faced Minnesota and Minneapolis earlier in the season. So Yara just kind of wrestled cowardly, you could say, and I completely get why he did that, because if he just forfeited the match, he would have to forfeit the tournament. So instead of forfeiting, he just lost in that fashion. And you could say what you want, but I completely get it. He's hurt. So his injury ultimately held him back. He lost to Luke Luffman. Somebody beat the season. He lost to him in the consolations matches. So no All-Americans for him. And then I'll go kind of backwards a little bit. 184, Shane Cartagena-Walsh, the redshirt freshman. Again, really solid tournament. Had to face Carter Storauchi, though, in the front side of the bracket. And when you have a match like that, you just can't do anything like that. You're facing now the 5-time national champion. So
only 5-time champion ever in the history of NCAA.
Yeah, so what are you going to do there? Then lost his wrestle back match in sudden victory. He was very, very upset after that match. He lost in sudden victory 4-1. Was slamming the mat, very upset at himself. But he's a redshirt freshman. He has plenty of seasons left. He'll definitely be someone for the future to look out for. Like I said, Shirley went 0-2. And then Andy Clark, 149, also, again, had to face... He won his first match, was a good win, and then had to face Shane Van Ness from Penn State, a tough loss, and then had to face number 4 seed Panera Johnson from Iowa State, lost 4-3. So Rutgers had a really weird NCAAs. They won 14 bouts total. I think the guys who lost, you kind of expect that Yara, he was hurt. Shane, he's only a freshman. He's not obviously fully developed. Jackson Turley's been really, really consistent this year, so it makes sense. Andy Clark as well, a good guy, good wrestler, but not as good as the other guys. And then Peterson and Shawver expected better. That's really, really tough, especially Pearson. You pin the reigning national champion, but then you don't get anything from it. You don't even get All-American honors. Shawver as well, you can't repeat All-American honors. And then Oliveira, someone who redshirted last year, so people kind of forgot about him, but was an NCAA qualifier in his other year at Rutgers in 2022 or 23, I'm pretty sure one of those two, and then was 1 win away from All-American. So it sucks how it ended for Rutgers. I think you can definitely say this is a disappointing tournament. But again, next year they have a lot of guys returning. They only lose Turley and Yara. And then there's that question of who replaces Poznansky in the lineup. We'll see. But Rutgers wrestling season done and dusted. And yeah, another year with Goodale at the helm.
Well, on to 2025, but we go from one upset to another. Rutgers men's lacrosse takes down number 11 Johns Hopkins, obviously one of the powerhouse lacrosse schools in the Big Ten and also just in lacrosse. They take them down 11-8 on the road. And Matt, I mean, for a team that kind of had some tough sledding, before that game they were 4-5, a game under 500. They played their first Big Ten game against a ranked team, and they pull out the victory. And it kind of was in Rutgers fashion. You know, Stoller kept the opponent to under 10 goals. Rutgers just barely scored more than that. And they come away with the win. I mean, Hayden Summer, with 3 goals. Colin Kelly with 2. Colin Zeller with 2. Colin Cardilla with 2 goals. And that's a nice win for Rutgers, both for the Big Ten standings, but also just for confidence. Because Get ready for the onslaught of their next
yeah.
opponents. Number 3, Maryland on the road. Then number 3, Ohio State on the road. Number 2, Maryland at home. Number 19, Michigan at home. And then on the road to finish out the season against number 7, Penn State. You and I were talking about this a little bit before. If Rutgers goes, 3-2 in that stretch, they have a chance, but
I think so.
you also have to pull off 3 upsets.
Look, you look at those 4 games, and oh my gosh! I mean, I know you face Maryland at home, but they're one of the best teams in lacrosse. I'd say you got to beat you have to beat Michigan at home. That's a guaranteed. And the next game, I'd say you probably could win is probably at Penn State. That's the next, because
you're going up against the other top 3 teams in the nation.
Yes, I mean, the Johns Hopkins win was actually, if you're looking at the schedule, they had to win that game. So they did win that. Now you face Ohio State, that's going to be really tough. Then Maryland at home is going to be really tough. Michigan, a team that they actually beat last year, and Rutgers had a really bad year again last year, and they beat Michigan. And then Penn State, someone they played twice last year, but lost to them both times. So if Rutgers could beat Michigan and Penn State, and maybe get a win in the Big Ten tournament, I think they're an NCAA bid, but we'll see how it pans out. I mean, I remember I was in Philly. Me and Frankie Palumbo, shout out, went to get some food, and I checked the Rutgers men's lacrosse score, and I see they won, and I'm like, what the heck happened? What
went wrong for Johns Hopkins?
Yeah, because we know how the season's gone. They lost to St. Joe, they lost to Princeton. I mean,
lost to Stony
Brook.
Yeah.
So the fact that they beat Johns Hopkins, that was insane. So, the offense, give credit to them, really good stuff, and the defense, we heard a lot of positives when the defense really clamped down Johns Hopkins, of course, Carden Stoller. So when all those elements come together, team. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, not much season left for them, but we'll move over to women's lacrosse. They also played Johns Hopkins, number 7 team in women's lacrosse. They fell 17-6, and I don't know, it's been an up and down season. You start off well, you get a ranked win against Stony Brook, but then you also have some tough losses against a team like Yale, teams like Princeton, and then another tough loss against Johns Hopkins. But again, the Big Ten slate is about to get underway. Ohio State, Penn State, your next 2 matchups. One is home, one on the road. And then you finish out the season with tough opponents. So, it's tough with lacrosse because the season is so short. Not just the number of games, but also just the time frame of it. You're playing a lot of those games within only a few weeks of the season. So hopefully Rutgers women's lacrosse can kind of get back on track with a win against Ohio State at home on Sunday.
I mean, they've matched up with Ohio State really, really well in recent years. I remember 2 years ago I was covering the team. They beat Ohio State in overtime. Really solid Big Ten win for them right there. And yeah, I mean, you look at the rest of the schedule, there's definitely a lot of W's left on the board for Rutgers. I mean, Northwestern at home, Maryland at home, USC at home, all tough games. I know Northwestern and Maryland are ranked. I believe USC is probably ranked as well. And hey, Cassie Spillis has a homecoming game. She's actually an assistant coach at USC, so she'll come back to SHI Stadium. Only a year after she left, so not really long, but that's pretty cool for her. But yeah, Rutgers. Well, the rest of the Big Ten games, you got to beat Ohio State. You got to beat, I'd say, maybe Michigan on the road or Penn State on the road. But we'll see how it pans out because this team took a big hit with the loss of Spillis. And so far, despite their record being 7-4, 1-1 in conference play, I've still been really impressed with this team.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of potential. But again, you have to make sure you get the right pieces going at the right time because of the length of the season. Move over to Rutgers baseball now. They go out to the West Coast and not the showing they thought they would have. Played against number 8 Oregon State, fell 7-3 back on Tuesday of last week. They had a 3-game set with Oregon dropping 2 of the 3 games. One thing to note, though, in the win, Rutgers won 8-0, and both games that they lost were close. 4-3.
I was going to say that. The pitching was really solid.
4-3 in game 1. They got walked off in the last inning. And then a 4-2 game in the game 3 that they lost. But the game that Rutgers won was a heck of a pitching performance all around, but Landon Mack had himself a day. He was named the Big Ten Pitcher of the Week and Freshman of the Week.
There you go.
And you look at the box score, Rutgers obviously didn't allow Oregon to score, but you look at the pitching statistics for Mack. Through 7 innings, 2 hits, no runs, 4 strikeouts, no walks, and a hit batter. The impressive thing about that, at one point in the game, he retired 18 straight batters. That's tough to do. And listen, when you're playing against one of the top teams in the country, we're not, as sports fans, you're not one for moral victories, if you will, but if any moral victory, it would be that. I mean, you had a solid pitching performance from one of your younger arms, and that's what's plagued Rutgers, I think, a lot throughout this season so far, has been not having stability on the mound.
Yeah, I agree. I think the pitching has been a problem with this team for a little bit now. So just to see that, I think this series, if I go 1-3, sorry. That's a moral victory. I think, hey, winning one game is really impressive. We knew it would be really tough for Rutgers going to Eugene, having to face a top 10, a Big Ten team, and you win one of the games in a solid performance and a lot of takeaways. I think you go back home now, face Princeton and Washington this weekend. You have momentum on your side. Despite not winning the series, there's still a lot to work on with this team. Like you said, there's a few moral victories you can take from that.
Yeah, and then Rutgers will return home to play Princeton starting on Wednesday. Not starting because it's not a series, but they'll play Princeton on Wednesday, and then they have a series against Washington starting on Friday. Another Big Ten team, another West Coast school that you haven't really played. So, this is the time of the year where you're still right around that 500 mark, but you want the wins to keep going up, not the losses, especially in the conference play. Because, there's more teams in the Big Ten this year. Obviously, the previous tournament format, not all the teams made it regardless. So now there's even more teams fighting for all those spots. And it's going to be tough. Listen, it's the moral of the story for this season has been a lot of new players. I mean, Rutgers bringing in so many new players, different coaching staff, and things of that nature. So, honestly, I think a 500 season is respectable, given all all the circumstances. But at the same time, you want to see, production and wins, obviously, much earlier on in the season. But sometimes you got to just take those growing pains and kind of learn with them. But baseball is the opposite of not softball. Baseball is the opposite of lacrosse, where it is a very long season, where you play a lot of games. There's a lot of time to get back, in the win column. But move over to softball real quick. Another West Coast trip. Played Oregon State and Portland State Tuesday and Wednesday. Won both of those games 4-2 against Oregon State, 8-6 against Portland State. And then a tough series against Washington. 2-game doubleheader on Saturday. Lost the first game 9-0. Lost the second game 12-0, both in 5 innings. Rutgers recording just 2 hits throughout the two games. And the more concerning thing, I think, was the performance from Ella Harrison, your freshman star pitcher. 3 innings pitched, 7 hits, 7 runs given up, only 5 earned. But on one hand, it's like, yeah, you want to see better from your ace. But on the other hand, it's like, all right, she's a freshman, A, and B, you're going up against a team you haven't played, and is probably one of the better softball teams in your conference. So it's give and take, I feel like.
Yeah, they had a good start to the West Coast trip with those 2 wins, and I was like, all right, maybe we'll see. But obviously didn't end on the right note. 2-2 on the West Coast over spring break. But like the baseball team, a lot of new faces, freshmen, transfers, what have you. More freshmen for this case for softball. So I think after having a solid year last year with that, I think they totaled at least 30 wins. Again, I think kind of the 500 records. But that's not a fair. If you finish like that, fine, we'll take it. I think that's kind of a fair expectation for this team. So we'll see how they sputter out. They also come back home to face Oregon. So we'll see how that goes when they play Penn State. So now they're really in the full swing of Big Ten play. Same thing for the baseball team. So we'll see how they also pan out.
Yeah, 16-19 so far, 1-4 in conference play. A lot of season left to be played for both baseball and softball. But Matt, I think the one sport that everybody, is the biggest fan of, football, starting to circulate in the in the news here on the banks. Rutgers spring training, if you will, going on. First press conference today with Coach Greg Schiano. Some injury news we got, which is kind of something we've come to, I wouldn't say love, but something that we're used to as Rutgers, as people that cover Rutgers.
This isn't a shock to us.
This is per Brian Fonseca of NJ.com, NJ Advanced Media. Rising sophomore defensive back DK Gilley will miss will miss the entire 2025 season after suffering an injury in winter workouts. That's just the tip of the iceberg, Matt. Kenny Fletcher, Sam Brown, Brian Felter, Shedrick Rhodes, Mo Toure, Abram Wright, and Isaiah DeLuch will all miss the entirety of the spring. And I think the biggest names that come out of that are Sam Brown and Mohamed Toure.
Yeah.
Sam Brown, obviously a gruesome leg injury to end last year. Mohamed Toure tears his ACL last season before the year started, or Achilles, whatever it was. Those are two guys that are going to be keys for this team, and you need them healthy, and it's very different on different sides of the ball. Obviously, Sam Brown you need because Kyle Monanga is no longer here. The defense, you need Mohamed Toure out there. As simple as that. Rutgers has always prided itself on defense, and having him out there makes them just that much better.
Yeah, I mean, I remember last season we talked about the injuries. Well, not we, because we didn't have this podcast, but everyone in media and Rutgers Nation talked about the injuries. And, that's what people said. Oh, the Rutgers finished the season. That's pretty good after all the injuries they had. And, Nick, it's not even August yet, and they're already starting. So, I mean, it's pretty concerning. We'll see how it affects the team. I have a feeling that this isn't the end of the list.
No, and it's shocking because you look at the availability report for Big Ten football teams. Obviously, it comes out every week. And you go through and you see the injuries, and everybody has injuries. It's football. It's a tough sport. Guys get worn down. It's just it's a fact of the matter that that's what's going to happen. But the amount of injuries that are season-ending for Rutgers, it seems like no other school is within 5 season-ending injuries of Rutgers. And I hate to laugh about it because obviously you feel bad for these players. You want them to play. But it got to a point last season of just insanity where it just things kept going wrong. And listen, Matt, you and I, we sat down, we looked at the schedule. It's not an easy schedule for Rutgers next year. I mean, yes, you would like to make a bowl game. You've done it in the last 2 seasons. But it's a tough schedule. I mean, even to open up the year, right? You start off with Miami of Ohio and Ohio, who are not bad teams. They're mid-majors, yes, but the MAC championship last year featured those 2 teams.
Yeah.
Then you play a Norfolk State team with a solid coach we'll see how he is. He's a solid player, but Mike Vick, the coach over at Norfolk State. And then your Big Ten opponents are tough this year. You dodged all the heavyweights last year.
Here they come now.
This year, you're playing all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, not everyone, but you play Oregon. You play Ohio State. You play Penn State.
Yep.
And you need all hands on deck because it's going to continue to get more difficult, especially as the schedule kind of evens itself out, if you will.
Yeah. And
you continue to play a Michigan and a Penn State and Ohio State. Very rarely are you going to get the schedule that Rutgers got last year.
And that's the thing why people hate on Schiano. Look, they had a Mickey Mouse schedule, you could say. They were gifted a nice and easy schedule. And the fact that they finished that way is disappointing. And then fans say, well, look at the injuries. And I get that argument. And I'm not the biggest football guru guy, so I'm not going to act like I am. But I see both sides of the story. They're very, very banged up, so they did the best they could. But then I also see, look at your schedule, look at some of the games you lost in ridiculous fashion. How do you lose to Wisconsin? How do you lose to UCLA? How do you lose to Illinois with that call? It's a lot of what ifs. How did this happen? If this happened, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the Rape Bowl would have been different maybe too. They would have been playing a different bowl if they also beat Illinois and teams like that. So there's a lot of ups and downs, but the fact of the matter is Rutgers football did not have a great season last year. It was just disappointing, and based on the schedule they had, they didn't perform the best they could have. And there were injuries, that's also a fact, I get that, but it should have been a better year for Rutgers football last year.
Without a doubt, but a lot of exciting things, as always, happening here on The Banks. I want to thank you guys so much for listening. You can find the podcast on YouTube at The Daily Targum's YouTube channel and online at thedailytargum.com. Matt, very nice to be back after a little bit of a break for spring break, and we'll be back with weekly editions of the Rutgers Rundown podcast. Matt Mangam, Nick Hart, signing off for now.